Welcome to the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the Pearl of the Orient. Shanghai is the city of the future. All systems go, full steam ahead. It never stops. Technology, innovation, ambition. It's everywhere. Join us as we explore this new world and talk to the people making it happen. The Tech in Shanghai podcast. The future is now.
So everyone, welcome to the first episode of the Tech in Shanghai podcast. This podcast is dedicated to the people of the Shanghai startup scene. The purpose is to give a little bit of insight into what's going on here on the ground in China by speaking with the people that are directly involved in it. Now, before we get going, I'd be remiss if I didn't throw a shout out to Brian Rose at Silicon Reel. It is through that podcast that I kind of got the inspiration to do this one. His podcast is about what's going on in the London startup scene. Very interesting guests. Lots of really interesting things happening there. And after listening to that, I thought, well, there's probably a bit of interest in what's going on here in Shanghai. It's a fairly fragmented scene, as I'm sure we'll get into, but interesting nonetheless. So that's why we got this going. So thank you, Brian, and shout out to all the guys at Silicon Reel. So today our guest is Alex Duncan. He is the head of product development at KAWO. Now, I could introduce you to KAWO, but I think I'll pass it over to Alex so I don't butcher it. So, Alex, thanks for coming on the show. And why don't you give us a brief introduction to KAWO, what you do, who you do it for, and what kind of the status is of the company.
John, it's great to be here. So, KAWO, we're a small company spun out of the Mailman Group, the very successful social media agency based here in Shanghai. And it's our mission to build technology that empowers Western brands to be better at social media in China. So the first part of this journey has been to build a publishing platform which supports all of the brands at the Mailman Group, but will very soon scale out to support other brands, other agencies. We already have some beta clients on the platform, and feedback's been good. We're powering about 35 brands right now on Sina Weibo and Tencent Weibo. And we give them rock-solid publishing, scheduling, and we do deep analytics into their fans, where they're coming from. And eventually we hope to provide much more sophisticated insights into how best to speak to their Chinese audience. Right. It's definitely a challenge for foreign brands on social media here.
Now, for people that may not be familiar with why a service like KAWO is necessary, not everyone's heard of the Great Chinese Firewall, but a lot of people are familiar with it. Basically, it's it's a limiting of what internet users in China can access vis-a-vis foreign websites, particularly social media. Can you discuss that a bit and then kind of relate that to the necessity for a service like KAWO?
So, yes, you're right. I mean, it's almost thanks to the Chinese firewall that we even have a business at all, because Facebook isn't accessible to the general populace. And Sina Weibo and increasingly WeChat are the dominant platforms for social in China. So it's not just about the inaccessibility of these platforms, it's also about the cultural differences too. For example, one of the points we hit with a lot of brands coming onto our platform is the use of emoji, or the little yellow smiley faces. Many brands are not comfortable using those in the West, and I think it would be fair to say that they are generally the preserve of teenage girls. But over here, actually, it doesn't carry the same sort of cachet, and so we do encourage brands to use these, and even analytics that we have on posts show they can increase the engagement by adding these small characters to posts. So it's that kind of insight that we also aim to bring to clients, right, as well as protecting them, making sure they do or don't say the right thing, phrasing things in a certain way. I think we've seen classic examples very recently with Justin Bieber posting that photo of himself at the temple in Japan, honouring the people that died there, and that was very badly received in China and caused a big furore. And I think it's the aim of KAWO to protect foreign brands from making such errors. Right. On their communication.
And you mentioned something that's actually quite unique to China, in that the social media engagement, as far as I can tell, is really amazing here in China. It seems like it's a much larger part of people's online and social lives than perhaps in the West, where it is, is becoming a very big part of life itself in the West. But can you speak to kind of, like you mentioned about Justin Bieber, the sensitivities that exist in the social media market here, and also regarding the service that KAWO provides, is there any, suspicion on behalf of the government that it's a workaround, or is it simply taking legitimate content from legitimate content providers in foreign companies and delivering it to the Chinese market in an acceptable way?
So to address the sort of second part of your question first, I think we're very much seen as a positive influence. We have a positive relationship with Sina, and they are definitely supportive of us bringing these providers of rich content onto their platform. And we currently power brands like Liverpool Football Club, who have incredibly popular content, especially on game day. You see huge spikes in engagement on their channels, thousands of people liking, commenting and resharing the posts as their team is achieving success on the other side of the planet. And so I think it very much is a positive influence. And what we aim to do is help these brands to be culturally sensitive and to avoid saying things which may get them into trouble. So there's a layer of protection built into our platform, and that is partly automated with sort of keyword filtering and extra checks, and then also a layer of human protection. Mm-hmm. People really looking at what's being posted and making a judgment call on whether or not it's okay.
Mm-hmm. And regarding the sensitivity of the social media market here in general, is it more reactionary, inflammatory than perhaps in the West, just given the climate, or is that kind of off base?
I think it is, yeah. One of the sad things I think we've seen over the past few years is with some control on these platforms, we've seen people perhaps engaging a bit less than they did in previous years, which is not such an issue over in the West, where there's less issues with sort of freedom of speech there. Mm-hmm. But I would say for the general everyday user, it's a great way to engage. And the sensitivity, obviously things go viral on Weibo just as quickly as they do on Twitter, and there's actually a lot of crossover between these platforms these days, as increasingly people are sharing things in multiple languages.
Right. Now, obviously this show is going to have a massive following, so some of our listeners are going to be organizations, foreign companies that are really eager to learn more about China and to enter the market in some way, if not with products directly, like what you're doing with their social media campaigns in general and their content. Now, what KAWO does, to my mind, it provides a huge benefit to these companies, because it basically allows them to enter the Chinese market in terms of their social media content without devising and having to set up an entirely new social media plan and platform in order to do so. Their content crosses over. You guys make sure that it's applicable to the audience. It says the right thing. It communicates the right message without changing it too much. Is that accurate depiction? And if so, can you speak a little more about the true benefits that this service provides to foreign companies that are trying to gain a foothold in China?
Yeah, so that's absolutely the case. I mean, one of the key things we have that none of the competitors do at this stage is we allow brands to almost syndicate their Facebook content directly into China. So we pull their feed in English directly into our system, and then our team will go through and translate these posts and localize them, perhaps change the context a little bit, provide extra detail if necessary, and then push that out onto social media. Now, the benefit to a brand in this case is they don't have to have a completely separate content plan. We're just using their existing English language content plan being pushed out in other markets and syndicating it into China. It also gives them transparency as well, because at any time of day or night they can log into our platform and they can see exactly what's going on. And I think there's very few agencies in this market at this stage that provide that level of transparency. They can see exactly the comments that are being made. They can see machine translations of those comments to get a feel for what their followers in China are actually saying and how they're engaging with the brand. And so I think in terms of one of the key sells for foreign companies is that transparency.
Right.
You're not just trusting some team in Shanghai. You are actually seeing what they're doing on a day-to-day, almost minute-by-minute basis, and able to have the confidence that they're working on your behalf.
Right. Now, that makes me think of two things. The first is, how big of a team of translators do you have to have in order to, translate all that content? And because, as it says on your website, you're not only using logarithmic translations, you're using real people to really communicate, a coherent and a clear message that's applicable to the Chinese social media market. So do you have a big team, or how does that whole process work?
We don't actually use any machine translation at all for the content. The only time we use machine translation is when we're translating comments for the customers to see. So it's all human translation. We have a team of about 6 or 8 people at the moment working across the brands on the platform currently. And if you think about the workload, I mean, every brand has a handful of posts every day that need translating. It's possible for a few translators to handle quite a number of brands. Mm-hmm. The only advantage of having a slightly bigger team is you can have more people focused on specific industries, so on different types of brand, and then the specific language that goes with that as well when it comes to football, if it comes to fashion, and being able to translate those words and get to know the feel and the brand voice is definitely an advantage.
Right. And the second part of that is it the domain of KAWO, is it one of the fundamental services to provide analytics in terms of how these social media messages and content are what kind of impact they're having on the market, and a measurable impact to the clients that you're working with in the West?
So I think one of the exciting things about KAWO is we've not been going that long. It's less than a year since we launched our product and started getting people using it. And so we really still don't quite know what the thing is going to be. We know there's an opportunity here. For foreign brands, they have to be on social media here if they're going to engage. And so the first part of that was publishing, was getting them onto the platform. Now we've got this fantastic opportunity where we can really look at what to do next. Is it the deep analytics, which is certainly a huge challenge, but I think we're currently at a point where we're consolidating the publishing side of our platform and also exploring what the next things are going to be. It could be analytics, it could be transparency. We could go deeper into finding out your key influencers and helping you engage with them. There's so many different things we could do. We could try and add other platforms, get WeChat onto our system. So yes, it's that's one of the exciting things about working in a startup, is really reacting to your customers.
Right.
Bigger companies have to plan things over larger timescales and make more more well thought out decisions on investment, whereas we have a small tech team and we can be quite reactive. Mm-hmm. If there's a feature that we really think that people are going to benefit from, then in a matter of weeks we can get it wireframed, developed, and get it out there and being tested with a few clients and see what the feedback is.
Right.
Is it something people will pay for? Is that going to help us build a viable business here?
Cool. So relatively, quite young and ready to kind of go in whichever direction your clients and your customers are kind of pulling you, where you see the most value for them.
I always think for a small company like this, the most important thing is to have a clear vision as to what the problem is you're trying to solve.
Right.
I think the actual way you go about solving it is less important, as long as you and your team are always on the same page. Mm-hmm. And I go back to sort of my initial point, which was we are trying to help foreign brands be better at social media in China. Mm-hmm. Whatever way we can do that, if it's better publishing, better scheduling, pulling in content from other places, better analytics, fans, whatever that is, we're going to try and find that and then productize it and get it in people's hands to try.
Right. Now, can you discuss a little bit about the sales process at KAWO? I mean, we both know, and everybody knows, that China is receiving a lot of attention lately. There's a lot of interest in China. Of course, everyone knows how big the market is and how much opportunity there is here. I'm wondering, regarding clients in foreign countries outside of China, are they beating down your door to use your services? Or is it still a relatively hard sell? I know you've gotten some big clients. Maybe you can discuss some of them. But kind of give us some insight on the sales process for you guys.
I think actually that is one area where we've been learning a lot. We've tried quite a few different things. There's many different types and sizes of customer that could potentially use our product. But I think there's only certain customers that will really see great benefit. And that's certainly something we've learned over the past few months. We've had some people who've tried the platform and perhaps they've not had as much on the ground activity here in China. And so the social media is very much a supporting element to that. It's not a solution in its own right. Mm-hmm. So we're at a stage now where we've found customers who we can really service well and provide great value to. And so we're very much redirecting the product around those customers. I think it's a challenge for any small tech business. You often have a huge list of features you could build, but actually the most important thing is to find the ones that people will pay for and focus on those and make them rock solid. Not just 50% right, 80% right. They've got to be 99.9% solid. And that's definitely where we find ourselves right now. So I think it's fair to say we're going after larger clients, people who already have some level of brand recognition here in China, because that makes it easier to grow a solid fan growth, a fan base, and engage with followers, rather than helping brands who have no presence in the market yet. That is, unless they are doing other marketing activity. Right. If you're a brand and you're making a big push into China, our platform definitely can help support you in your fan growth. But as a service on its own, you're not going to see the benefit as if you are doing other things, physical retail, events, or other situations like that. I think the International Beach Volleyball Federation are a great example of this. We power their account, and they've seen great fan growth over the last sort of few months. They grew to a couple of 100,000 fans across their networks. And when they come and do events here in China, like they did in Guangdong and they did in Shanghai just a couple of weeks ago, they see great engagement on their social channels. And we're able to help them make the most of that around these other events.
Cool. Now, does KAWO work with any clients that are currently on the ground in China that have a presence here and you are kind of bolstering their presence, or is it mostly clients outside of China that you're helping to enter the market through social media, get a feel for it, and then perhaps enter at a later date?
So it's the majority of our clients are people who are on the ground and doing other things. I mean, for example, Liverpool, they have other Liverpool Football Club. They have other media partnerships. They obviously have a huge following in terms of people watching their games, buying their shirts. Sponsorship in the English Premier League is increasingly interesting to Chinese companies, and so having this strong name over here, and obviously Liverpool just came second in the Premier League only yesterday. So this is for businesses like that. We provide this extra level of exposure here, and also insight into what's going on.
Right. Now, before we change it up a little bit, I just want to ask one final question about KAWO, and that is, in this in this industry, is there any other competitors, or are there any competitors that you compete with directly or even indirectly that provide a similar service or at least a similar outcome to KAWO?
Yes, I mean, there are dozens of social media tools, the same way there are for Twitter or Facebook. There are lots of platforms that allow you to publish, that give you a snapshot of what your fans are up to. But I don't think any of those are targeted towards the types of customers we're dealing with. Many of them are targeted towards small, local agencies. A couple are targeted towards bigger foreign agencies. But then we definitely have a niche here in terms of pulling from Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and the transparency we provide. There's no other platform that we know of right now that allows a client on the other side of the world to log in any time of day or night and really sort of accurately see what's going on.
Right.
No wool being pulled over the eyes or anything like that.
Right. I mean, it's so seamless. When I first read about the concept, I was really intrigued because it is such a... I mean, if you're living here in China, you know that to access your foreign social media, you need to, proxy server, VPN, something like that. And of course, it's a huge barrier for large organizations, and it just seems like such an easy solution. Of course, you can set up your own accounts and manage them that way, but in terms of efficiency, just being able to use the content that you've already put out on your Western social media and have it be represented in the right way in China, it's an interesting business for sure.
Yes, it is. I think one of the more difficult challenges for us as a company compared to perhaps a tool like Hootsuite or Sprout Social that you may be familiar with in the West is that KAWO requires you're publishing to networks in a language that you don't speak. And so there's a lot more there's a lot more effort involved in sort of getting up and running on these platforms. It's not just a case of clicking a connect button to connect your Facebook and Twitter like you do with Hootsuite. So that's one of the biggest challenges we've had as a company so far, is how do we onboard these customers? Right. We had the first few customers, it was taking several months to just get them on board, which takes a huge amount of effort and makes it very hard to predict your revenue and the growth of the company. But we are getting better at this. And I think as our product starts to become more solid and more feature-rich, I think it'll become an easier sell to companies as they see the advantages.
Just out of curiosity, are there any companies that you can't work with just because their content might be too provocative or is of the wrong kind? Have you come across that?
Yeah,
I mean, beyond the obvious, pornographic adult content sort of stuff. I mean, are there any legitimate organizations in the West that you just can't really touch here?
Beyond the obvious, we have to be very careful about gambling.
Right.
And betting, which is obviously not allowed on Sina Weibo. We have to be a little bit careful with some other brands, perhaps related to alcohol, but we've not had any problems so far. The same sort of issues actually you probably have on Facebook. Right. I mean, a lot of these pages can be age restricted.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Now, this is the Tech in Shanghai podcast, so I want to switch it up a bit right now. From going from, a bit about KAWO as a company, what you guys do, to what the experience of launching and working in a startup here in Shanghai is, encompassing both the work and the life that comes with it. So I'll let you kind of dictate where you get going on that, because it's a pretty broad question. But can you just give the listeners an idea of, Shanghai is a crazy place. We were discussing it before we went live. There's lots going on here. There's construction everywhere. Everyone knows the China story. And in Shanghai, it's particularly, it's the epicenter of all that action. And it's becoming very international, not so much multicultural, but cosmopolitan in kind of the luxury life that's available to many people here. But right juxtaposed to that, still, very low income, lives that are right next to it. So it's a very interesting city. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the startup and tech scene here? From my mind, it seems a little more fragmented than perhaps a Silicon Valley, a London, a Tel Aviv, a Berlin. I mean, it seems spread out. I mean, just organizing a podcast like this, I'm reaching out to people that are very disparate in kind of their location. There doesn't seem to be an overly strong community, but that could be completely a misperception on my behalf. So tell us a bit about startups in Shanghai.
I mean, I've been here doing startup things in Shanghai for the best part of 7 years now. So I've seen it change a lot. And although, yes, you're right, it is still quite disparate and things do sort of seem to come and go quite quickly, it's definitely got a lot stronger. When I was first here, there was only a few different networking events, more for foreigners in the startup community, and there would just be a handful of people there. But now you have events like the Techizu Barcamp days, which have hundreds of people attending them. Mm-hmm. There was just a JavaScript meetup last night. There's another event that I'm speaking at in a couple of weeks. There's a lot of things going on now. Anybody who's looking to attend these things, just go and check out meetup.com or get on Facebook, and I'm sure you'll find lots of these events. They occasionally appear on sites like Hacker News as well.
I've been to some of these meetups, and they're great. I mean, it's great to see that these things are being organized and that people are coming together. But I have to imagine that the scale is much smaller than what you might find in some of the jurisdictions that I mentioned before, because you go there and it's a relatively loose, association of people. A lot of networking, as is kind of the bane of China.
The thing is, you're hanging out in the foreigner community, right? And you're going to English-speaking events. If you try and sort of dig a little deeper and go to more of the local events, then I think you'll find that it is on a bit of a different scale. So I had the fortune to go to Alibaba's developer conference in Hangzhou. I think it was either early this year or late last year, and that was on a different scale. They took over an entire construction site outside of Hangzhou. It was incredibly hard to find. Our cab driver got lost multiple times and almost dropped us in the middle of nowhere. And we ended up at this event, and it was entirely in Chinese, and it was on an an awesome scale. They'd taken over these buildings which had not yet finished construction and put up lots of temporary exhibitions. There was an entire building dedicated to mobile gaming, another one dedicated to sort of cloud and enterprise and SaaS. Another one, I'm not sure, but there were huge presentations taking place all the time, hundreds, if not thousands of people watching them. There was a big startup competition funded and by Alibaba with prizes. So there definitely it is taking place.
Right. Now you mentioned something really interesting, actually, in that I'm attending, even though they're attended by a lot of local Chinese. I am attending events organized primarily by foreigners, and that's a really it's a really good observation. And in light of Alibaba IPO now, it's really bringing a lot of press to the Chinese startup community and market. Can you speak a little bit to the difference between foreign funded, foreign organized startups in Shanghai and China versus their Chinese counterparts? I mean, any similarities, any differences?
I actually am much more of a fan. I have quite a few friends who are local entrepreneurs. Most of them came from lower tier cities. Perhaps that makes them a bit more hungry to succeed. And a couple in particular that I'm thinking of have done incredibly well. And they've not built, investor-funded businesses. One guy who just put money onto credit cards, he worked a full-time job and built this business at the same time. And now he's doing millions in revenue and incredibly successful, all by bootstrapping and being very hungry and not wasteful in the way that I think a lot of investor-funded companies can be.
Right.
And I would say a lot of more of the foreign companies here that I know that have raised money are more similar to what we're used to probably reading about in the Western media on TechCrunch or Pando Daily or whatever it is.
They go through the normal process, getting seed rounds and then funding rounds.
Yes, I mean it is a lot harder to raise funding here.
Right. As a foreign company or any startup.
I think in general there just isn't the money sloshing around that you have in the US particularly. And I don't see that as an especially bad thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, seed rounds here are a lot smaller. There are some entrepreneurs like Steve Bell of Trilogy is completely focused on it's a foreign fund completely focused on local companies doing very small seed rounds. There's China Accelerator, who've built a pretty successful incubator. I actually went through China Accelerator up in Dalian a few years ago, and that was a great experience. There's Hackcelerator, also from SOS Ventures down in Shenzhen, investing in foreign companies doing hardware in China. So there are some of those companies, but there's something wonderful about some of the Chinese entrepreneurs I meet. I mean, I have a very good friend. I hope he won't mind me. He's possibly not going to listen to your podcast, so I'm going to tell his story anyway.
How dare you?
Great guy, real inspiration, really sort of hungry and somebody who I would say is driven with a mission in life. And he, while he was at university in a city not too far from Shanghai, he started a restaurant with a couple of friends. And his restaurant, I forget what type it started out as, but it wasn't doing very well. And eventually they said, right, we have one more month, otherwise we just can't afford to fund this any further. And they decided to change the concept to hot pot. So they went from employing all these chefs, which they fired, to letting everybody cook their own food. And so they just need the waiters to put the hot pot on the table and provide the raw meat and vegetables. And something about it just took off and was incredibly successful. And then several other people tried to start hot pot restaurants on the street and often came up to him and said, oh, we're going to take you down. We're going to, you'll be out of business before you knew it. And he said to this day, his is still the most successful, profitable hot pot restaurant on that street. And there's something wonderful about how scrappy that his tale was. And he then used the money he made from that business to go on and do other very exciting things in the education space. Wow. But again, all sort of funded by the money he was able to make from the business. He didn't raise any capital.
Right.
Very much finding, and in order to do that, you really have to find something people are willing to pay for. We saw app.net. I don't know if you know that story, just basically in its heading for the Deadpool And that's a great example of where it wasn't really solving a problem that people had, and it raised, $2.5 million, which isn't a massive amount in Valley terms, but it went the way that it deserved to go.
So perhaps more in China at the moment. I think what you're saying is that people are forced to build more viable businesses from the get-go rather than relying on funding.
Certainly local entrepreneurs are, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you've been here for 7 years. Is that changing? I mean, in terms of, you've got a lot of hype around Chinese social media and technology now with Alibaba and WeChat and Sina and Weibo and all these things. More activity coming from the foreign market, as well as more Valley and other VC firms setting up shop here. Can you notice a difference?
It's obviously different on the top end. I think it's difficult to compare companies like WeChat and Weibo to real startups because they're so vastly funded by these massive parent companies. I mean, WeChat was founded by Tencent, probably with dozens, if not hundreds of engineers, and a really deep pockets from which to draw from. And WeChat doesn't appear to be under any massive pressure to monetize, but they are doing it reasonably successfully. So there's a difference between that and probably a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast who I'd imagine are more lower scale entrepreneurs. And I think definitely at that scale, it's more difficult to raise money. There's trepidation from overseas investors. They have less options to go to. There are investors here and there are funds available, but probably the rounds are smaller and there's less opportunities.
Right. But by and large, I mean, coming from an investment background, historically China's been a bit of a hands-off place because it's difficult to trust the infrastructure in terms of the legality of things and your partners and all that kind of stuff. You've been here for 7 years. I feel like that is changing, kind of maybe slowly, but is it becoming a more trustworthy environment that people can confidently or more confidently invest in, whether it be their time and future, as you yourself are doing, or a VC firm investing capital with Chinese-based companies? Is that changing?
I think absolutely. I mean, quite a few companies probably had their fingers a little bit burned from the boom in the group buying businesses a few years ago. I don't know if you were around here at that time, but millions and millions. Some big names like Groupon rushed into the Chinese market with abandon, and as we saw, very few of them did very well. And I think this was possibly a more vicious market than anywhere in the world. Right. I saw some crazy things happening. People buying 100 Kwai phone cards and selling them for 90 Kwai and losing 10 Kwai on every transaction just in order to acquire customers in that sort of gold rush to be the king of group buying. And a lot of foreign companies poured hundreds of millions of dollars into that boom. And I would hate to see something like that come back again. I like the fact that investment over here is more conservative, but you're right. It could get better.
Well, it's interesting. There's so much opportunity here. It's difficult to resist a draw, I'm sure, from some of the big organizations. And to bring everything full circle, KAWO kind of allows organizations to dip their toes in the water and get a feel for how they'll be interpreted and received in China. So. It's very interesting. Now, if we can get back for a second to Shanghai specifically, I mean, I've spoken with a number of founders, CEOs, people that work at foreign organized startups here. Why Shanghai? I mean, oftentimes the teams are mostly foreign. I'm sure there's barriers to setting up in Shanghai. Can you speak a bit about why Shanghai and kind of what are some of the trials, tribulations, and obstacles to doing so here?
I think for me, Shanghai is just a lot more livable. I don't know how much time you spent in other cities, but I've spent time in Hangzhou, Beijing, Dalian, and Shanghai is just the easiest life I've found in China. My commute to work by bike is about 10 minutes. I have a whole plethora of Western restaurants and many flavors of Asian cuisine just minutes away, and all at very reasonable prices.
Well, let me rephrase that a little bit. No doubt Shanghai is where it's at in China. I agree totally. What about China in general? If a lot of startups the foreign-based startups that are here in China are not always, and perhaps not even most of the time, orienting their startup towards the Chinese market. Why do you think they are setting up here and having a go of it here rather than somewhere else that has a more supportive infrastructure, a better climate, things like that?
I think a lot of people sort of in previous years have been attracted by the lower cost base. Rent, which is changing,
quickly evaporating.
Yeah, that's definitely going in the wrong direction.
Right.
But then again, still, starting salaries for somebody fresh out of college here are a lot lower than back home where I'm from in the UK or over in North America. I think the energy here is quite a good reason to be here.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly I'm not in any rush to head back and work in England. I feel like things sort of change at a much slower pace. Right. I like the rate of change here and the optimism. And
there's a hopefulness and ambition, that kind of buzz. I mean, just to interrupt you for a second, but I talk about this with people when I go back home, and they ask me about China, of course, and it's hard to pinpoint why Shanghai specifically is such a great place to be, because it does have its faults. But it's one of those things where there's so much ambition, there's so much activity that it doesn't really matter if your field is broadcasting or startups or art or fitness or business or real estate. There's a lot of capital, a lot of energy, and a lot of momentum behind everything. So things are happening.
That's true, actually. I think we've focused mainly on tech, but there are a lot of foreign entrepreneurs here building many other types of business in the city. People building gyms, yoga studios, restaurants, healthcare centres, dentist practices. Many other foreign entrepreneurs here, and bringing expertise from back home to Shanghai, which definitely makes the city richer and a better. A more attractive place for people like you and I.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I wanted to address, I hope it's not too sensitive. Most people who live and have worked in China are aware of a term called guanxi. Basically, it means relationship. It's part of doing business everywhere in the world, but it's particularly prominent here in China. And it's a very big part of business, not only for foreigners doing business in China, but perhaps even more so for locals doing business with other locals. But the startup and tech scene has always operated on kind of different parameters than perhaps other industries. I'm just wondering, is guanxi and that concept something that you guys have to address and embrace, or can you operate kind of independent from it?
Actually, I think Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, published an article the other day with his 5 common misconceptions of China, and I think he was right with one of them, that guanxi is not necessarily any more of an issue here than it is anywhere else. I mean, if you think back home, having good relationships with your bank manager, the tax man, whoever it is, will make your life doing business easier, and that's definitely the way it works here. And I think probably you're right in suggesting that tech is more reliant on guanxi than perhaps it is in the North America. But then I have great examples of when we were in deep trouble with a previous startup that was more sort of US based, and guanxi there in the valley definitely saved our ass a couple of times. So it just operates differently in China.
Right.
And that's the thing that I think people have a misconception about it. It has an appearance of being more shady. It's involves dinners and karaoke and cigarettes and baijiu and things like that, which don't quite seem as clean as having a coffee with somebody, or
But can nonetheless be fun sometimes.
Absolutely, I don't discount any of them. So I disagree with you on that one. I think guanxi, certainly, I've got great examples when it's been just as much of an issue over in the US, when we were kicked off a payment platform and we had to find somebody high up through a contact in another organization and beg our way back on. We were, all sorts of
Sure. I mean, I'm not particularly saying it's a bad thing. I just want to get your take on how your business and your career had to interact with that concept. I mean, everybody knows
it's very important.
It's about who you know anywhere in the world you go. Perhaps here maybe the stakes are just higher, or the modus operandi of how you go about doing it is a little bit different. As you said, KTVs and cigarettes and
it's very important. I'll give you a great example, KAWO specifically. So a while ago, we were doing lots of talking to Sina's API, and we suddenly hit some limit and our entire platform was blocked access from talking to Sina, which for a company that depends on being able to publish to Sina is a nightmare. And so it took us a while to work out exactly what had gone on. But then we've now built a relationship with Sina. They know what we're doing, and we are open and honest with them about how we're trying to bring foreign brands on. We've now managed that risk by building a relationship. You know, we're now not going to get booted off randomly because we hit some arbitrary limit. We are a partner with them. And so that's a great example of how Guanxi affects the current business I'm working on.
So being proactive, being open, being honest, and letting the people that are involved in the industry here know what you're doing, how you're going to do it, so that there's no surprises and nobody comes knocking on your door and telling you to get out.
Yeah, it's about managing these risks.
Are there any other, problems that you're experiencing? And, a lot of would-be entrepreneurs might be interested in knowing some of the obstacles to setting up here in Shanghai or in China in general.
My pet problem, and my boss Andrew will laugh when I talk about this, is the internet. I would say there have been times when it has been the bane of my life, and it goes through phases. Sometimes on rainy days, it's terrible. Other times, just randomly, it just doesn't work. Something you're trying to connect to doesn't let you. I've had servers attacked here. I even had to visit a data center once and reconnect a server that had somehow become disconnected from the internet. So for a tech business here in China, that's definitely one of your big challenges. And at KAWO, it has affected our work to a massive extent. We've had to really think about how we change the technical architecture of our platform to allow connections across the planet. If you think we're talking to Facebook, which is not available in China, but then we're publishing to Sina, which is in China, and so we have to have servers here, and we have to move this data between them. And we're talking about, in many cases, tens, if not hundreds of gigabytes of data that have to be both, pulled from the networks within China and then accessible to clients abroad when they're looking at their accounts. These challenges are formidable, and are a constant battle. Literally just before I came to record today, I looked at some of the monitoring we have on our platform. I noticed that we'd seen a slowdown in some of the ways that we're exchanging data, and that's affecting our clients. Anytime somebody logs in, they're waiting now for an extra few tenths of a second each time to request some data.
Common expat complaint here in China, for sure.
So it's not just like a day-to-day complaint, but it's actually
affecting the business.
We have to hire more engineers and build things in different ways, and that affects features. Mm-hmm. It means we're not rolling out features that may bring us increased revenue because we are just working on behind-the-scenes fundamental architecture.
Right. Now, would that be a sufficient problem to maybe consider or setting up an office or even moving outside of China? I mean, do you have, for KAWO's business particularly, is it really important to be on the ground so you can have those relationships with the social media platforms you engage in here?
I think for KAWO particularly, it's essential we're here on the ground. Thankfully, services like Amazon's cloud infrastructure have allowed us to locate servers all over the place and very easily move them around as we see fluctuations in network connectivity. So that's removed the need for a physical office at this stage. But I'm sure as we grow and as we sort of really find our feet, there'll be a time when we will need a foreign office somewhere.
Now, I have to ask because I know all the people that are listening to the show right now would want to know as well. Obviously, China gets a lot of attention for the environment here, shall we say. We both know what we're talking about. Has it affected your life? And if so, what's your take on it? Is it something that you actively try to mitigate against with any sort of practice or routine, or is it just something that you accept as part of doing business and living here in China?
Actually, I mean, it affects my life probably to a ridiculous extent. I'm an obsessive cyclist, and there are days when you go out and literally the air is just appalling. And it's one of the things I think I'm most passionate about sort of in my spare time these days, encouraging more people to be more aware of the environment and more responsible. I mean, one of the saddest facts I read recently was that 1 in 5 cars in China was actually purchased in 2013. That's a ridiculous rate of growth in car ownership. And is probably a sign that things are likely to get worse. That said, we have seen bad pollution in London as well. There was a few days recently when I said to my dad, I said, actually, you'll find that the UK is smoggier than Shanghai today. That's obviously a rare case. And it's another good reason for not living in Beijing, living in Shanghai.
Absolutely.
Shanghai is marginally better. But yeah, the environment is terrible. There are some easy things that could be done to fix it, but a lot of it is about mentality. People are buying cars not because they need a car, but because they want a car, and that's just unsustainable. We have the most fantastic metro infrastructure possibly in the entire world. It's a very cyclable city. It's completely flat. This downtown is very small. You can get anywhere very quickly, and people really should be more conscious, and that's about education.
Right.
It's about making sure people are thinking about these decisions.
It is an issue that seems to be getting more press, and with the president having mentioned it, and now they're taking it on as in one of their 5-year plans. I mean, it's an interesting convergence of two, really characteristic Chinese traits, especially right now in modern society. And the one is just ravenous consumption and interest in having that life, which many were deprived of for so long, and now it's available to them, and wanting, as you said, those cars and all those other things that might contribute to a poor environment. But also China's tendency to take on a problem and just grab it by the balls and really implement some interesting solutions. I mean, being on the ground here, I'm from Canada, and back home in Canada, I don't see many electronic scooters. I don't see many electronic buses, certainly. I mean, China's invested an enormous amount in green energy initiatives, biggest in the world, in fact, on a national basis. So it's interesting to see those two things kind of going head to head, and hopefully China will take that vigorous can-do attitude, and as New York, as London was turn of the 20th century, perhaps that's just what Shanghai is going through now, and we're on the cusp of having brighter days ahead. I think
it's something all of us can be a part of it, foreigners and locals alike. Yeah, you're right that things are improving. I just read recently that now 2.3% of the UK commutes by bike, which is a fantastic statistic, and certainly one of the highest in Europe. And actually, China has got worse on that front.
Well, coming from used to be the only mode of transportation for a lot of people, so it's
one of the great things about air pollution is that it puts people face to face with the consequences of their actions, which they don't see a lot. I mean, if you look at things like recycling, people don't really experience landfill, or it doesn't have a direct impact on their life if they recycle or just throw it in the trash.
Point, yeah.
And so it's my hope that this air pollution and this consciousness does motivate people to take more responsible decisions. And I'd love to be a part of that as well.
Right.
At KAWO, if we were able to power any brands that work on this or something like that, then they should definitely reach out to us.
Sure.
It's part of our mission as a company to be socially responsible, and we're not just here doing social media. We are caring about our environment and want to help. We got I forget the name. We had a pro bono account on recently. Some guys that were doing some great stuff. I'll think about it later and email you.
So for yourself, just to wrap that up, it's a case of trying to do what's within your power to minimize how you contribute to the problem here, and maybe kind of educating, informing the people in your direct circle about what can be done to reduce it. But other than that, just kind of dealing with it.
In terms of pollution, I think I'm a little bit unique in that I think a lot of other people sort of let it bother them to quite an extent. I love doing the things I do so much that it's actually worse for me to not do them because of the pollution than just to get out there and suffer the consequences.
I agree. Yeah.
And so perhaps at some point, 30, 40 years down the line, I'm going to be dealing with the consequences of my irresponsibility. I do wear a mask some days, but I almost never don't go out.
Yeah. No, it's the same for me. I on a daily basis, it actually doesn't bother me at all. I look out and it's cloudy, or I look out and it's sunny, and it doesn't really change my perspective or my activity level. The only pause I have for thought is, what kind of damage is it doing? So, like you said, 40, 50 years down the road, will it materialize in something? But
we're all doomed.
yeah, to be honest, I don't have that long of an outlook anyway, so it doesn't.
No, me neither. Going to do a lot of skiing when I get older.
So, a couple more questions, Alex, then I'll let you get out of here. One of the things I just wanted to ask you, just in general, if you have time at all, what books are you reading now, or have you read recently that that you find interesting? What's on your night table?
What books do I read? So I've not actually read...
or listened to, or any way of consumption you want to...
I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I read a huge amount on topics that interest me, mostly tech-focused, but a lot on the environment these days as well. In terms of just podcasts, which I enjoy in general life, I'd say This American Life is a fantastic one. On startups, I really like This Week in Startups from Jason Calacanis. It's been going for a long time, and some of the back episodes, particularly with people like David Hennemeyer Hansen from 37 Signals, really great ones for entrepreneurs to listen to, sort of hearing these battling viewpoints between bootstrapping and raising VC.
Changing it up, what you've been here for 7 years, you've been involved in the startup scene for quite a while. Two-sided question. What's the best piece of advice you've received vis-a-vis working and starting up in Shanghai? And what's the best piece of advice you've given? Or what piece of advice can you give to the listeners about starting up here?
I think I often feel like I'm a bit of a slow learner on these things, and it takes me a while to realize things that are often obvious to other people. But I'd say the most important thing to anybody starting any business, and this applies sort of universally no matter where you are, is you've got to love what you're doing. Starting a company is, I think Elon Musk said, it's like chewing glass. It's an incredibly painful process. And there are many days when you will be sat there in the office late at night or early in the morning, and you just can't necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel. And what you've got to have to keep you going through those days is a sense of purpose and a love for what you are doing. What you're doing, building that company, has to matter to you so much that you're willing to go through the tough times to get to the other side and have a profitable business on your hands. And that's certainly the thing I've learned. Some of the things I did in the past that didn't work out was not because they couldn't have worked out. It's because I didn't love it enough to see it through the tough times that it would have taken. And so certainly that's one of the things that's top of my mind.
Great advice. Do what you love.
You've got to do what you love. Yeah. You've got to find something that's really important to fix, find a problem, look at big themes that are going to be here for the next 10 years. I think somebody, I forget who it was, said that some of the most the startup ideas with the biggest potential are some of the most obvious ones. You look at things like building electric cars. We all know that at some point we need electric cars. So it's such an obvious idea, but it doesn't make it easy to fix.
Absolutely. And what about advice you've received?
My goodness. So much advice I've received. I think one of my favorite piece of advice, I had a wonderful boss who I think of very fondly when I first worked in Shanghai, and he used to say, let's drive the crap out of it. And he would always go twice as hard as he thought, as it looked like you needed to go in a situation, but actually often that ended up being just the right amount to solve a problem. And we'd often have in that business, sort of crises of things. We were shipping a lot of parcels and things would go missing or something like that, and he'd say, let's drive the crap out of it, let's really do everything we can. Let's not just do one thing, let's do all 10 of them. And I'd say that's a fantastic attitude to have.
I love it.
Sort of unrelenting.
Right.
Unrelenting.
No holds barred, take no prisoners, just go for it.
So I'd say, whatever you're doing, just drive the crap out of it.
Cool. Well, Alex, that's it for us today. Thank you so much for coming on, being our guinea pig and our first guest on the Second Shanghai
It's a real
podcast.
pleasure to be the inaugural guest.
Where can people get in touch with either you or KAWO?
So you can go to KAWO.com, KAWO.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Alex Duncan, and you can find KAWO on Twitter as well, at KAWO.
Cool. And you can find us on Twitter. For the moment, that is the only place you'll be finding us, at Tech in Shanghai. We will be up on iTunes, and a website will be coming soon. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Excellent.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Tech in Shanghai podcast. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Tech in Shanghai for everything tech from Shanghai and China. See you next time.